Hello, welcome to Ahval. Today we are going to talk about Turkish economy, and we have today two really important guests who have been watching Turkish economy a decade or more. On the one side, Andy Birch from IHSMarkit, Andy, who is joining from Washington, D.C., has just published a month ago a couple of important reports and analysis on Turkish economy, including Halkbank. Andy, welcome to Ahval TV.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
And Mark Bentley. Mark Bentley is a regular contributor to Ahval. He has been taking the pulse of Turkish economy every day with his analysis, and we are very much grateful he can make it today. Welcome to Ahval TV, Mark.
Thanks.
Let me go right into my questions. Andy, Mr. Erdogan is currently in London, and Mr. Erdogan spoke again about interest rates over the weekend, and the lira continues to look weak. And he is going to meet investors, I believe, today and tomorrow. How do you see the lira performing going forward, especially in the light of Erdogan's statement that the government has already taken necessary measures?
Well, the government has certainly shown an ability to rescue the lira at times and pull it out of previous downward tumbles. But frankly, the situation right now is very challenging to try to rescue the lira. If you just look at domestic policies, you have fiscal policy that's still expansionary. You have a central bank, and if what Erdogan said is that they've done enough with their policies, even what they did last week, the central bank, we view as a series of half measures. Of changing reserve requirements, but still avoiding what we view as a necessary kind of shock to rescue the currency. They're avoiding that. So even last week, with about 2 or 3 measures to try to rescue the lira, still continued to slide. And you could argue that maybe at the very, very end of the week it stabilized a little bit, but entering this week, it's still very strong downward pressures. Even when you look at early Q2 confidence indicators, you see that the growth that is kind of underpinning the reasons why for these expansionary policies and be giving some stability to the lira, the growth might be trailing off here in the Q2 if you believe the early PMI indicators and such. And then on top of this, you've got now a much more worrying international environment where already the emerging markets in general are not doing as well. And you have on top of that regional problems that will further undermine the. You have the U.S. withdrawing from the Iranian deal and the uncertainty of what's going to happen there. You have an increase in hostilities in Syria spiking up again and an uncertainty on what's going to happen there. So with an ongoing distrust of domestic conditions, you have an international environment that's deteriorating and making it harder to believe in the lira going further. And then, of course, on top of all that, you had another round of bad news of the current account deficit just this morning, which further hurts the stability prospects.
Let me follow up the last statement you touched, the current account deficit for March just published today. Mark, can you give us how serious is the problem when you look at this table?
Yeah, I mean, it's continuing to worsen, as Andy said. I think it was something like 4.8 billion in March, which was over 50% increase on the previous year. And the numbers just don't look good. I mean, we're seeing central bank reserves shrinking at the same time. Portfolio investment has recorded a net outflow. And this is particularly important because Turkey is relying on portfolio investments now with foreign direct investment shrinking. So, and as Andy said, the global environment is deteriorating. So we will see perhaps a continuation of this portfolio investment outflow going forward. And of course, the key thing will be what will Erdogan do if he's re-elected in terms of economic policy to put things right, because as things stand now, the situation is not really particularly sustainable given the current policy of the government. And we have had some good news on tourism income, but it's really not a sustainable situation with those portfolio outflows.
I see. Andy, let me ask one more question on the Turkish economy, then move to Halkbank. So I'll do two parts question here. The first part, elections, as you know, is June 24th. It's just, 5-6 weeks left. How much risk politically Erdogan is taking right now by not raising rates? Can he basically muddle through here till the elections? And the second part, on Halkbank, everybody is talking about Halkbank these days. I receive questions every single day. The sentencing of Attila, Mehmet Hakan Attila, is on Wednesday, who is the former executive of Halkbank, government-owned, one of the largest banks in Turkey. What is your feeling about the size of the fine and when it might come?
Well, to start with the economy, certainly what Erdogan is doing, he's doubling down on a strategy that's worked for him before, of following these populist measures and hoping that a financial crisis does not sprout up. It's worked so far. Growth has been high. Unemployment is dropping. But as Mark says, it's unsustainable. It is unsustainable in the long term. And the question, as you say, can it last him through the election when there might be some move towards stabilizing economic policies afterwards? My question is, I guess, is that he doubles down on the strategy over the next few weeks and months. Does this erode confidence in investors and observers that he is going to pivot after the election? And if the more he is aggressive right now in staying away from this, what we would view as a kind of more responsible and more stabilizing policies, I think the risk of a crash rises. The more he's more aggressive and doubles down, rather than showing some signs that he will indeed pivot after the election, that raises risks. Now, whether it will crash, whether there will be a financial crisis, unfortunately, I've sworn that off of forecasting a crisis several years ago, because we at IHSMarkit, we've been following these huge deficits, this reliance on portfolio capital for years, and we've been warning about it for years. And we've been saying, well, it's one crisis away. It's one crisis away. And what's happened since then? There's been an attempted coup. There's been a major surge of security issues within Turkey. AKP has briefly lost their majority and it created huge political uncertainty. And through it all, they've avoided a major financial crisis. As an economist looking from the outside, I unfortunately have to say I'm not exactly sure how it does, but they do find a way to muddle through. The risk is higher that he's raising risks. But can he muddle through? Absolutely, he can. I just think the risk is higher, and the risk is higher even so because you've got this looming crisis that is going to happen in the financial sector at some point. There will be a fine, and it will be, in our view, a substantial fine. Now, what that fine will be, unfortunately, it's very hard to pin down exactly. in early April, there were rumors that the fine on Halkbank might not be so bad. That led to somewhat of a rally. But I think I don't think I ever really bought that personally, that it was going to be, on the low end of, say, maybe $1 billion. Now, in our report, we stated that it definitely could, the fine could surpass 8.9 billion, which is the current record from the U.S., and that was against Paribas. So it could surpass that, given the wealth of evidence, given the breadth of the circumvention of the sanctions, that the crisis could be higher, or the fine could be higher. Whether it's high enough to completely destabilize the financial sector, that unfortunately I can't say that. But I can say we believe that it will be high enough to cause a crisis at Halkbank. Will need to be some sort of restructuring or government support of Halkbank. The fine will be enough to cause some problems to Halkbank, and that will cause at least a temporary interruption of capital flows. Again, Mark mentioned earlier about the outflow of portfolio investments. It could potentially negatively impact those flows for several months. So the size will be problematic. I think it will completely destabilize the economy. And as far as when, before the election, then that goes back to the question that you just asked. It raises risks that could turn around and hurt Erdogan quite strongly. But if I had to give my gut, I think that the U.S. will be somewhat cautious in implementing these fines, and it might not come within a month of the sentencing. So it might be maybe a little later in the summer.
Got you. Mark, how much of an impact would this looming fine, and by the way, we are going to link Andy Birch report in our story on Ahval. It just issued late April on Halkbank and what might trigger with the fine, and more information on Attila and Zarab case. Mark, how much of an impact we might see if we see indeed somewhere, higher billions as a fine or even more?
Yeah, as Andy said, the fine could be really substantial, and if you look at the trades that Zarab said he did, we could be talking, well, some people say possibly in the tens of billions. But again, as Andy mentioned, the US may be looking a little bit more cautiously at the situation. Turkey is, after all, an ally. I don't know how much sway politically Mr. Trump may have with the Justice Department, etc. I've got no idea about the inner workings of things, but I think the Turks have been working hard to make sure that this that the fine is as low as possible. And it appears that Halkbank has entered into talks whereby the Justice Ministry will ask Halkbank to give its own version of what kind of trades were made. So it really depends on how those negotiations go, I'm guessing. I don't really know enough about the technical aspects of the process, but the economy, sentiment is obviously key, as well as, where is the money going to come from? Clearly, Halkbank will be going to pay for it itself. So where is that money going to come from? We've got deteriorating sentiment globally. Turkish treasury yields are already going up, so this is just going to add to the perception of Turkey as perhaps a less safe place to invest in other emerging markets right now. So it's really open to question how much of an impact there will be on the economy. But as Andy said, I think it will be pretty substantial.
Let me follow up with this and then move to Andy and finish the interview. Mark, with the elections approaching, we already talked about that, and the Halkbank case looming. How much of a risk do these problems, dangers present to investors who want to invest and come to Turkey?
I mean, Standard & Poor's, I believe, didn't even mention it in the report, the Halkbank issue. Quote me if I'm wrong, but I think the general feeling is that when the fine comes, as it probably will come, then it will come after the election. But of course, there's always a risk that it could come before, and Attila's sentencing is on Wednesday, so we've got a little bit of gap there, as you say, 5 or 6 weeks to the election. So conceivably, something could happen. Whether investors have already taken that into account, one might assume that they have, because we're looking at general sentiment here in Turkey in terms of the lira. But obviously, it would come as a big shock if it came before the election. And there would be a big market reaction, I would say, if the fine was substantial. Don't know what you think about that, Andy.
No, I agree. I think, I mean, an investor clearly has this. I mean, it's not a hidden case. This has been known about. And I think there's already been a lot of pricing into currency and into investment. I think, again, the size, we go back and forth, I think, with this. What is the size? And that's going to determine the shock. And if you see a size that's not in the tens of billions, as you say, we might actually see, a positive reaction on portfolio investment. It's not inconceivable that they've already priced in and they already know that it's coming. And so if it's less than what they expect, then this outflow that we just noted in March might be short-lived. And again, it's a resilient economy. It's proven it's a resilient economy, and investors are willing to be in there with a lot of risk. So again, if it's a positive surprise on the fine, then even if it is what we might view as a substantial fine, if it's a positive risk, then that might be a positive impact actually. Flows.
Andy, do you expect other figures to be included? A lot of people, including people like former Treasury officials, Jonathan Schneiser from FDD, predicting that there will be another indictment and the other Turkish figures might be included. Do you foresee anything? And the final question, I am sure apparently you followed Zarab Attila trial. How did you find the trial? Did they meet your expectations?
As far as other prosecutions, I think that will be difficult politically and just technically. They grabbed both Attila and Zarab, while they they grabbed them unexpectedly. There's not going to be any grabbing anybody unexpectedly moving forward. And somebody in absentia would be politically dangerous, and it would be hard to be able to move forward with that. So I think that prosecution-wise, it always could, but my guess is it would be very sporadic, depending on who they might be able to. They would have to know that they would have to be able to get them. Now, whether they expand the fines, that's another question. I think there's enough overwhelming evidence, just what they already have, that they can justify fines on other banks because of their involvement. And I don't think. And again, maybe I might be wrong as far as what they have the power to do, but I think there is certainly the possibility of fines being spread out beyond just Halkbank, just based on evidence they already got from these trials. As far as the trial itself, certainly when you look at international, convention of trade agreements and things, this was a certainly more showy case than what you would normally see. I mean, you have people arrested at Disneyland, you have unexpected arrests at Capitol road shows, you have Rudy Giuliani being involved, you have the whole spread, the web of spread that Zarab presented. So it was a showy case, and I think that gave supporters of Erdogan justification that said, listen, this is just a show. This isn't a real trial. This is a trumped-up trial, and the manner in which it all happened certainly feeds into that. But again, I'm not an expert on these kinds of prosecutions, but the evidence coming from it was overwhelming, and I think in many areas just indisputable. And when you look back at the time, this isn't a surprise that this was happening. This was an open secret at the time, and they were actively shuffling around capital. So the fact that somebody is being prosecuted for this is not at all surprising, and certainly, I think, justifiable from an outside observer. So whether it was a show during the course, I think the evidence was overwhelming that it's certainly a justifiable outcome.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Andy, and thank you so much, Mark, for joining today. And I hope to have you both in the future again to recap what's going on with Turkish economy and whether some of your predictions and expectations will be realized in near or medium term. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.